we have an activity in which you have used skewers, and the skewers to make patterns. So blueberries, grapes, whatever type of berry you want, right? And you're making skewers and getting children to make different patterns. And so one of the teachers actually talked about how with her pre-K students, they did that, but she basically made an abacus. And I said, wow, you've been dating me to the point I can even remember what an abacus is, that I can say the word abacus. But she actually did that with her children. And because they're pre-K, she was able to use the long skewers. And she was showing, like, she would have 2 strawberries on this end, and then 3 of maybe a blueberry, and then tell them to push them together and how many they had. And then they had to actually look at, like, I have a piece of paper, and then they had to draw out what they had to make their equations and everything. Is that not the coolest thing? Utilizing food, and then once they did it, they wrote their equation, solved their problem, then they could eat their fruit.
I love it. I
I
have
did
a
too.
rising
I did
I have
too.
a
I
rising
thought,
pre-K
like,
student, so I want to tell their teacher that.
yes, yes, but I mean, and she said, again, because they're older, as you probably know, because you work with food. Depending on the ages, you can only use certain fruits or vegetables, because you could even use cherry tomatoes, but things that are not choke hazards for your itty bitties, but for the older ones. And she said that was just a wonderful activity. And I said, first of all, that's an abacus that you made. I don't know if you even know what that word is from way back when, but that is what you created. And now we have those beads. I remember that from kindergarten. But that's what they could do. And I was like, see, that is so genius. And so the kids are sitting there, they're eating a snack. It's a healthy snack. They're learning at the same time. So, but I'm going to turn everything over to you. Like I said, we had a wonderful time last night. They got to do different activities. As far as food, we made a smoothie, a shamrock smoothie, or some made some additional smoothies. They added more of the berries and things that were left over, which was really cool. And we also had that activity, and then we also
And
had some small
our
planting.
juice maker is in the call right now. Shout out Miss Anetta.
It was Miss
Hello,
Anetta that
everyone.
she saw the other fruits that were laying over there, because we had blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, and strawberries. And the regular smoothie like recipe that I had was pineapple, banana, honey, and what? Pineapple, banana, spinach. And so
Finished.
then Miss Anetta, when everybody else basically kind of finished the others, saw the fruit that was left, and that's what you want to do because you don't want waste, and that's what you're talking to
Right.
us about. And she started blending it all together, and we got to incorporate some more. So, with that being said, I'm going to turn everything over to our food preservation specialist to go with that.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that there wasn't food waste. That's really great. All right, I'm gonna share my slides. Just to introduce myself again, from last week. So my name's Candace Christian. I am a Home and Community Food Safety Extension Associate. I specialize in home food preservation in particular, and mostly I focus on training our family and consumer science agents across the state. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about canning and freezing. So before we go into talking about canning, which I can talk about all day long, I first wanted to show you, this is called Fat Tom. It basically explains how we preserve our food, how it all works. And this is a little bit of food science. So these factors influence any sort of like bacteria that could grow in our food, or also prevent bacteria from growing in our food. So we've got food. So bacteria, it needs nutrients to grow. Um, Also, bacteria is affected by acidity. If something has too much acid, too much acidity, bacteria doesn't like that. Just like us. I mean, I like sour foods, but I cannot handle too much lemons without recoiling. And then temperature also matters with preserving food. So are we for the case of canning, we are using hot boiling water or steam to preserve our food. So we're having heat kind of manipulate the control of bacteria from growing. Also, time matters. Oxygen. So if you think of like a canning jar, traditionally they only have about like 2% of oxygen in them. So preventing oxygen from being introduced to our food, it prevents our food from having like the brown spots, like when you slice open an apple, and prevents bacteria from growing. And then also moisture matters in how we preserve food as well. We talked about dehydration last week, and that is how moisture is how we preserve food. So we kind of manipulate the amount of moisture in a food when we dehydrate it or dry it. And it prevents bacteria from growing on the food or spoilage from growing. So we can enjoy it for longer. Okay, so I enjoy starting with a case study just so you guys know when we are talking about canning, why this all matters. Why are there all these rules set in place? Can't I just go in the kitchen and cook? Um, you know, it's really different when you're trying to like home process food or canned food. You can be slightly creative like you are with cooking, but not that much. With canning, there is an exact science to it. There are tested recipes, and that means that there are third parties that have tested these recipes in a lab. I think it's about like $2,000 at least, at minimum, to like test a recipe. So it takes a lot of time and effort to just create one recipe in a lab. So the reason for that is to prevent something called botulism, or the disease that causes people to, well, you could have paralysis, you could have blurry vision. You're sent to the hospital, definitely, if you have botulism, and sometimes it is fatal. So back in 2015 in Ohio, there was the largest botulism outbreak that the US has seen in about 40 years. So a long time. What ended up happening was with this church potluck, this congregation was meeting. They had everyone bring a meal to the church potluck. And this individual was an avid home canner, and they prepared a potato salad with their home canned potatoes. Usually, when we talk about food safety and potato salad, people immediately think, oh, wow, the mayonnaise. The mayonnaise got me sick. In this case, not so much. So the potatoes that were used to make the potato salad, they were home canned and they weren't properly canned, which means that this individual, they canned the potatoes in a boiling water bath canner, and that's what we'll be talking about today. But when we are canning at home, there's two different methods to choose from. There is a boiling water bath canner, so that's with mostly our fruits that we do that, or foods that are acidified, such as like sauerkraut or salsas or pickles, even tomatoes as well. Those are all using the boiling water bath canner. With potatoes or with vegetables or like soups or meats, all of those need to be processed in a pressure canner. It's a larger canner and it works with steam. So that's how these potatoes were supposed to be processed, in this large pressure canner. And unfortunately, they were boiling water bath cans. So what ended up happening was um, the individual that brought this lovely potato salad ended up getting 29 people ill. And there were unfortunately two deaths, and they were older adults that died. So usually, if there is some sort of botulism outbreak, what what really confuses the emergency department is one person will come in and it looks like that they have signs of stroke, and that's how it's written off. But then with an outbreak, there's another person and another person that came from the same event. They're coming into the emergency department. And that's when the doctors are realizing, oh, wow, this is not a stroke. This is a botulism outbreak. Because the signs of botulism, they so mimic a stroke. That's why, like, when I teach these classes out in the counties, I always wonder, because there's always someone that will tell me, well, my grandparents used to can green beans, in a boiling water bath canner. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's good. That means that, your grandparents were okay. But I just wonder, like, how many people, were given these canned green beans and maybe they weren't okay. Maybe it was a stroke that it was written off that these individuals had, and it ended up being, botulism instead. So, I mean, there's a lot of survivor bias to it, but the point is with this case study is that there is an older way of canning that prior to like the 1980s that was the best available science back then. The thing is now we know differently about what foods are supposed to be canned in a boiling water canner and what foods are supposed to go in a pressure canner. But
Candace, I have a question about that.
sure.
When you're looking at this and you actually have reported deaths like you're talking about in a case study, and you're able to trace it back to an individual, what happens to that individual? Because of course we know that it was an accident. They didn't even realize it. They were just donating their foods or what have you. But is it more serious because now deaths have occurred and it's traced to that?
That's a good question. So, like, according to the law, like with this church potluck, I don't think, and like, I'm no lawyer or anything, but like, I believe it would be under the Good Samaritan Act, with like a potluck. But if it was a company or organization that they had, botulism outbreaks associated with their product that they're selling, that's where it becomes very different and it becomes like, um, a more serious issue for that organization.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
That's a really good question, though. Okay. So, what experience do you have with canning foods? Does anyone have any experience?
For me, it was just watching family. I know my godmother, she would actually make homemade soup in the summer and can it. So we would have it in the wintertime, with all the fresh vegetables, your lima beans, butter beans, peas, corn. And then also my aunt, which this is further funny to me. I had an aunt and she would do all the different types of vegetables and fruit. And I remember her doing apples and they were mashed up to the point like applesauce. But clearly, from learning things now, they were not processed the right way because when she would open a few of the cans, it was mold at the top. And she would just take it off, scoop it out, and just throw that away and then give us the rest to eat, which by grace of God, we're here. But the term that was used, she said, oh, it's okay. It's just mothered. So I don't know if anybody else has ever heard that term, but that's what she would say. So, but like I
Right.
said, that was that
Yeah,
was years. That's years.
that's
So
kind of like a fermentation term, saying that's the mother. Like it's like if you're like making kombucha at home, like you have the mother, the SCOBY. So I mean that is a technical term, but really what it is spoilage.
right. Like I said, so now we realize that, and then again, that's probably why none of us have allergies like kids have allergies now because of some of the stuff that we ate. It was survival of the fittest, like they always say. Our Gen X generation, if we survived it, they just don't even realize what we went through. But I have to say, I ate it because it was so good to me. So she, like I said, scoop it off, and then and you're a child, you trust that adult, and you sit right there, and so
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So I'm seeing Anita would watch her grandmother do vegetables from her garden. That's awesome. Yeah, a lot of times when I'm teaching these classes in the counties, everyone has a story, I feel like, about their grandparents canning, which is really nice. My family is originally from Maine, and in the summer, my grandmother would get like all of her tomatoes from the garden, getting ready to go. And before I started this job, I saw her can when I'd go to visit, and all she would do is she'd put hot tomatoes in a jar, close it, and then she'd flip them. She'd turn them over. And I never thought anything of it as a kid. And, I ate those tomatoes. But like when I started this job, finding out like, oh, that's actually not canning. That's like, it does create a seal, like it does close the lid, but it's not actually like making it shelf stable. So that's when, mold would grow on those tomatoes. But yeah, happy to be here after those tomatoes were not properly canned. Other times too, I'll hear of people that they'll go to classes and they're a little fearful of canning because they saw a situation where maybe like their grandmother's canning lid was at the top of the ceiling. So that's more common than I really would like to have known that happened like it sounds like in the 50s and 60s, but yeah, people's lids were popping off. But yeah, I guess it sounds like we all have some experience to it. All right, so basics of canning. So a lot of times I'll get questions about, hey, I've got this food in the garden, or hey, I've got a ton of food that I have left over or something. Can I can this? My comments are always, you've got to use the best quality food to start with. Like canning does not improve it. So if you've got, for example, green beans that are kind of on their way out, I would suggest freezing those rather than canning them because canning them, it does not improve the texture, it does not improve the taste of the food. Yeah, you want to start with high quality food to start. Basically, with canning, you're going to have a canning jar. You're going to place food into a heated jar. Sometimes people miss the step of making sure that they're heating the jars before canning them, but it's really important because we've got these glass jars, and if you're putting um, whole jars with these filled with food in this boiling water, what could end up happening is it affects the integrity of the glass in the jar. So I always suggest if someone's canning, it's always really great to either have two pots going, or if I've got a class, usually what I'll do is I'll utilize the dishwasher that's right there, and I'll just put the dishwasher on a cycle, and it'll keep the jars warm for me and ready to go when I'm ready to pack the food in the jar. But always start with heated jars and placing the food in. Some recipes will say you can use raw food to fill the jars, or you have to heat the food up. It's really important that you follow the directions with whatever your like canning recipe says. What they'll call it is raw pack or hot pack. So, for example, if you like want to can carrots, there's two different ways to do that, and your recipe says that. Personally, if there's an option on the recipe that says raw pack, I always choose raw pack. And the reason for that is because canning takes a long time. I don't need to cook my carrots twice. I know that, like, before I cook it for my family, like, there's no reason to cook the carrots twice. It's just not going to improve. It's not going to improve the texture, and I don't have little babies anymore, so I don't need mushy carrots. Um, also another basics of canning and I really wish I had an image on this. Maybe this needs to be created, but what essentially you're doing is when you're closing the lid on here, the air is being driven out of the jar. So you don't want air in your jar, right? Because air in your jar, well, that's oxygen. Oxygen, it can promote spoilage that we don't want, or things from going brown. We don't want like mold, or as Sharonda said, the mother from growing. We don't want that. We want the air driven out of that jar. And then when the processing time is done of canning, you're going to put it on the counter, and that's when it's cooling. So that cooling process is really important. And what ends up happening is that a vacuum seal is formed. So basically, all the air that's driven out, as it's cooling, the seal, it closes up on the jar. And that helps prevent spoilage from growing. Okay, so let's talk about unreliable resources and unsafe canning methods, because there's a lot. You may have seen information from family, maybe friends, the internet, even food celebrities. They'll have it like on the back of their, their famous cookbooks, and they may be great chefs, but they don't have the technical background of knowing the safety of canning at home. So, even though like we do trust family to provide us information, we do trust friends to provide us information, we probably shouldn't trust the internet to provide us good information a lot of the times. Um, and a lot of times we do trust food celebrities. It's hard to hear when someone says, "Hey, I've been canning like this for 30 years and no one's gotten sick," or "This is a great recipe, you should try it," but there's no science to back the recipe. It's really hard to go against that. But like from NC State, I'm telling you, do not, if there are any recipes that family or friends or you've seen on the internet, any recipe that is dated before 1984, don't use it. So back in the 1980s, there was a huge change in how the USDA and the National Center for Home Food Preservation, all the knowledge they had on canning, it changed since the 1980s. So anything afterwards, you can use essentially if it's up to date. So for example, all of the extension offices, if you have a relationship with your family and consumer science agent or anyone in the extension offices, they all have these books from the University of Georgia. They're called So Easy to Preserve. It's a wonderful canning and just home food preservation resource in general. And you can look at it, but I would just make sure that it's the newest edition, just because guidelines are changing all the time of about canning, and we want to follow the best available science that there is. For example, I think in some offices they're still roaming around a fifth edition of this cookbook that I'm talking about, and it's got information about elderberries on there. Well, all of that has been scratched out in the newest edition. So we don't want people using older canning cookbooks because they may be missing crucial information to keep them safe. What's another thing? Oh, okay. Also, there's methods too, or tools that are out there on the market just to be wary of. So you'll see like people use pressure cookers or open kettle method. I haven't in a few years got questions on this, but some people ask about canning in a microwave. Um, Canning in dishwashers, I always get that question at least once or twice a year, and it's always around the holidays for whatever reason. And then also I get questions about multi-cookers and oven canning as well. So these are all methods that we do not recommend an extension. Um, there's just not enough science to back that these work, or there is enough science that these are not safe methods to do in general. So I've been saying like on this slide a lot of unreliable resources, but I just want to go back to what is a reliable resource. So extension publications, anything from extension is a reliable resource that you can look at. the University of Georgia has a National Center for Home Food Preservation website. They are the people that NC State we get our home food preservation information on. They are the leaders of that field that we follow, but they have a free website that you can look at. The USDA has recipes as well that are all tested that you can utilize. If you want to go to a store and they have a Ball Blue Book, I would recommend that you stick to your high acid foods, your high acid food recipes on there. So what that means is that if you buy one of these Ball Blue Book cookbooks, try to stick with like jams and jellies on there, pickles or salsas or anything that's acidified. I would stay away from the recipes on there that are about like soups, meats, anything with vegetables, because we're just not sure how those recipes were tested, and they would be a higher risk if they weren't done properly. So that would be the only caveat on that. Okay, so why are all these parameters around canning? Well, it's because we are concerned about a few things. One of them that's smaller to care about, but still important because you've worked so hard on canning. The last thing you want is for spoilage to grow in your jars. So we're trying to make sure that yeast, molds, and most bacteria, we want to make sure that those are destroyed at boiling temperatures in our canning jars. Clostridium botulinum, that is the pathogen that causes the disease botulism. They form spores that require higher heat for destruction at a reasonable period of time. So you'll see in a recipe, it'll say processing time. That's something that you don't want to deviate from. So like with canning carrots, it'll say, I believe it's 20 minutes, but it'll say processing time 20 minutes. Say it's later at night and I got started on canning a little later than I wanted to. And then I think, what if I just process these for 10 minutes instead of the 20 minutes as the recipe states? I would highly recommend against that. We want to follow a tested recipe to a T, and that's to ensure that it is safe and that these spores are destroyed. The ideal environment for Clostridium botulinum spores to grow is it's got a moist environment. It's with a low acid food, so like in our case study, potatoes or green beans. It's got a temperature between 40 degrees and 120 degrees, and also the environment has very small amount of oxygen. Well, that ideal environment, it sounds like a canning jar, right? That's filled. All of it does. So that's why we have to take precautions. Okay, so we talked a little bit about botulism, but just to go over it a little more because it is so important to understand when you are starting your canning journey. And I don't want to deter anyone from canning, but you should be aware of the risks that could happen if you are improperly canning. So botulism has these vegetative cells, so these live cells, and they make a toxin that's poisonous to us. Even a taste can be fatal. There's a story back in Ashe County. It was several years ago, but an individual took a bite of her home canned carrots, just one bite of them. And she wasn't sure about them. I guess they were like iffy to her, but she thought, "Oh, I'm going to see if, they're okay to serve my family." She took a bite and she ended up being hospitalized for 11 weeks. So it was so expensive to be hospitalized for 11 weeks, and it just shows that this toxin is so like fatal and so severe. Patients that do have botulism, they often spend months on respirators, and they also require from the CDC like an $80,000 antioxin to be like flown in. So I think the moral of that story with the Ashe County individual is like if you can something, or if a family member cans something, or a friend and they give it to you, if you suspect something in a jar of food that may not be right, don't taste it. Don't, because the problem is with Clostridium botulinum spores or pathogens in general is that you can't see them, you can't taste them, you can't smell them. It's not like spoilage. You just don't know if it's in the jar. And then, you have a taste of it, and long and behold, you've got weakness, double vision, difficulty swallowing, speaking, paralysis. And this is all of an onset time of like 12 to 72 hours. So you do want to take it seriously if you think that a jar was improperly it canned, and it could happen. Okay, so we're going to talk about boiling water canning. So this is like the beginner version, the friendly version of canning. So as I'm talking about this, you can think about all the fun things that you can, but maybe start off with what jams and jellies can I make? What pickles can I make? Maybe what salsas can I do? Something that is a lower risk item. But like when you are canning like meats, vegetables, soups, it is a little higher risk if done improperly. And that's because there is a risk of those Clostridium botulinum spores growing. Whereas with like a jam or jelly or pickle, sometimes the issue is just that there might be spoilage growing in the jar, and it's not fatal. All right, so we'll go over this. Okay, so foods appropriate for boiling water canning. So high acid foods, you'll hear me say that. So this is a pH of less than 4.6, and that's like the technicality of it from the food science background. So this includes generally most fruits. So tomatoes, figs, Asian pears, ripe mangoes, ripe papaya, those are actually borderline to low acid. So those are usually like pressure canned, but they could be boiling water bath canned, but just know that those items in particular, there's usually you've got to add some sort of like lemon juice or acid to it for it to be boiling water bath canned. I'll just talk about tomatoes for a second because that's something very popular to can in our state. With tomatoes, there's two different types of tested recipes on there. You can boil water canned tomatoes. With that recipe, though, you are hot packing the tomatoes and you are adding lemon juice to the tomatoes. I can't remember on top of my head how much lemon juice you're adding, but the point is for you to follow a tested recipe with that. There's also another tested recipe that is canning tomatoes in a pressure canner. And that's not necessarily having to add lemon juice to the recipe. So just always follow a tested recipe. Another item that is a fruit that's low acid, just to keep in mind, are melons. That's also something that you're probably going to pressure can, or something that I would be careful of if someone gives that to you. Another foods that are appropriate for boiling water canning is those acidified foods that I've been talking about. So those are like your pickles, those are your sauerkraut, your salsas. They're basically a low acid food. So for example, with pickles, cucumbers, but you're adding in an acid to it. So an acid could include your white distilled vinegar, apple cider vinegar to it. And this equilibrium pH, it acts as a high acid food at the end of it. So it's safe to boiling water can. But the main thing to know, I think, about the two different methods is we're trying to achieve different heat with both methods. So with a boiling water canner, the boiling water canner, it only goes up to the heating of it only goes to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. 212 degrees is hot enough to kill spoilage. However, with a pressure canner, the other method of canning, that actually goes up to 240 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a lot hotter than the boiling water bath canner, which that's really important to know when you're thinking of these Clostridium botulinum spores. They get destroyed at higher temperatures. So at 240 degrees, they're going to be destroyed. So that's why there's those two different methods, and that's why you've got to follow a tested recipe that says, hey, you need to boil water can this, or hey, you've got to pressure can this. So this is essentially what equipment is needed on here. So you've got a pot, you've got a rack, and you've got a lid on here. Okay, and these are essentially the steps. So if you've got like a jam or jelly recipe, you're going to sometimes the processing time's only 5 minutes. So then that means that you've got to sterilize your jars. And then you'll start with enough water in the boiling water canner to cover the jars. I love, and if you have one or could afford it, I love having a tea kettle on hand when I'm canning, just because you never can have enough boiling water during this process. But you want to make sure you have enough boiling water to cover the jars. You want to add food into the jars. Then you're gonna have they sell like at Walmart, Amazon, I mean, really a lot of places, even in grocery stores like Lowe's Foods, they'll sell like these head spacers, they'll sell like a funnel, all these things that you need for canning. But you want to check the headspace, and your recipe will say what headspace to use for the jar. But essentially it's the space between the top of the lid and where the food ends. And that's really important because we want to make sure that there's a nice seal in your jar and that food's not seeping out of the jar. It's important to wipe jar lids, especially when you're canning jams and jelly. It's very messy. And then you want to put the lids on. You're going to lower jars onto the rack. Make sure you have that rack to begin with. It doesn't matter if it's metal or silicone, both work. What I would be cautious of you doing is using like a dish towel, because that's going to kind of block that heating element. And then there might be a cold spot in your jar. So make sure you're just not using a dish towel or something like that. You're going to add hot water if necessary. Put the lid on the canner, and then you'll count the processing time when the water is boiling. So you want like a vigorous boil when you are boiling water canning. Then you're going to remove jars from a padded surface. You'll cool away like on like either a cookie sheet, or you can use a towel. And this is going to be sitting there for about 12 to 24 hours on your counter. I would recommend, and I'm saying this from, we're using a shared kitchen at NCC, I would recommend having a sign that says, like, do not disturb these jars. We want to make sure that people are not picking up the jars while they're cooling, because that's all part of the tested recipe if the processing time is making sure that they're cooling properly. So we don't want people touching them. And then you want to check if the jars are sealed. So I'll go to the next one that will show a nice image on how you could do that. So you can listen to the pop that happens after you take the jars out of the canner. You can also visually look. This is usually how I check to see if my jars have sealed. You can tell that the lid is kind of curved down or inward toward the jar. Also, if you touch the lid, it shouldn't move when it's pressed. Or you could take a spoon and kind of like hit the top of the lid, and it should be making like a clear ringing sound. So those are a couple ways you could check if the seal has formed properly. For storage, you want to make sure that you're removing the screw bands, which honestly, before this job, I did not realize that you're supposed to remove the screw bands at all. And that's just to make sure that, there's first off, that the lid is actually sealed properly. Also, food debris, so you can wipe it off, and then, just preventing pests from being attracted to your jars. You want to wash the lid to remove any sort of food residue that might be on there. And then, of course, label and date the jars. The jars should last about 18 months. That's what, like, if you use like the ball jars, that's what they'll say on the package. So you can go ahead and follow that. And then you just want to make sure that you're storing in a clean, cool, dark, and dry place. So try not to store, your canned foods in an attic or maybe underneath some pipes or on a windowsill. You really want it in like a cool, dark place. Okay, sorry, I talked a lot about canning. I apologize. Does anyone have any questions about canning? Okay, I'm going to move on to freezing, but throughout this, if you have any questions, just let me know. All right, freezing is another really awesome method of preserving food, and it's another great way to avoid food waste as well. Okay, so the science behind freezing. Essentially, the water inside those cell walls of like the fruits and vegetables, they freeze and then they expand. The ice crystals are formed and they rupture the cell walls. That's the science behind it. What's important to know is that freezing, it doesn't make the food like any safer. It doesn't kill like all microorganisms that might be on the food. Some foods, and y'all probably have personal experience of this, some foods just don't freeze well at all. Foods for like raw salads like cabbage, celery, cucumbers, endive, lettuce, parsley, radishes, those don't usually freeze that well. Um, I've heard conflicting things about zucchini. I don't feel like the zucchini that I freeze ever turns out well. But I've heard from other people that, the zucchini that they freeze, they're fine with it. So you can kind of find out what foods freeze well or not. Starchy foods sometimes don't freeze that well, but other times it's all right. Starches like cooked macaroni, spaghetti, rice, or baked or boiled potatoes, they may not freeze the best. Um, Another one that might not freeze that well are like milk sauces or custard fillings, and that's because they separate. But you can just try it out and see how it goes for you. So freezing, the enzymes which cause the loss of color, loss of nutrients, flavor changes, and color changes in frozen fruits and vegetables. So that's all that's changing are all those enzymes in those foods. And that's what, changes the look, the texture of these frozen fruits and vegetables. These enzymes, they must be inactivated to prevent these reactions from taking place. Sometimes you'll see, like with freezing vegetables, there'll be recommendations about blanching first, and this is why for that. But as y'all know, with just freezing in general, there usually are textural changes that you'll see, and that's from the ice crystal formation, and the food has expanded. So freezing instructions. So first off, is same with canning. You're going to choose the highest quality of food available. You want to freeze the food promptly because you want the highest quality food. And then remember, some foods they just don't freeze that well as well. Preparation of this. Always wash your hands. Make sure all the contact surfaces or tools that you're going to use, make sure they're all clean and sanitary. And then you want to follow any sort of recommended procedures. Like I said, with some recommendations with vegetables, they require blanching, and that's just so it's the best possible product at the end when you're like thawing out your food. All right, so I keep kind of mentioning blanching, so we'll talk about what blanching is. So this stops enzyme actions, which it causes loss of flavor, color, and texture. So blanching helps preserve those foods before we're freezing them and making sure that they're, optimal nutrition, optimal taste, and look as well. So the blanching time is crucial, and it varies on what type of vegetable or size of vegetable that you have. So that's why it's just important to follow directions. So if you underblanch something, it stimulates the activity of enzymes, and is actually kind of worse than just not blanching at all. It really disrupts the cell wall and activity of the enzymes and kind of just does nothing. If you over blanch something, I mean, similar to overcooking, there's going to be a loss of flavor, color, also nutrient loss as well. So water blanching, it is the recommended way for all vegetables. And how you would do this is you would cool vegetables quickly and thoroughly to stop the cooking process. So you'd blanch, like for example, say you've got a pound of prepared vegetables, you're going to use 1 gallon of water. You're going to put the vegetables in some sort of like blanching basket, and you're going to lower it into the boiling water. And then you're going to start the blanching time as soon as the water returns to a boil. And then you're going to cool it. But that's essentially what blanching is, and it is really helpful and important when you're freezing food. So other freezing pointers, there's different types of containers you can use, which I'm sure you've seen on the market or already are using today. There's rigid containers. So these are really good for liquid, soft, or juicy foods. These are like our freezer canning jars, maybe our plastic freezer boxes, but they're really good for our liquids. Non-rigid containers like our freezer bags, papers, or use of papers or wraps, those are good for like firm or dry foods. For example, like if I'm freezing, like just as a family, if I'm going to like a wholesale market and I'm getting like a large amount of steaks or something, what I'll end up doing, the process of freezing meat is I will first cut it up in portions that I want it to be. I will wrap the meat up in aluminum foil. Then I will wrap it in plastic wrap. So these are our non-rigid containers. And then I will put it in a freezer bag, and then I will write the date. I'll put how many pounds of meat is in that bag. But that method, there's 3 layers basically that I added to, freezing that meat. That makes sure that there's no freezer burn. And that's a lot easier than me, well, maybe not easier, but it's more economical than me just taking like the package that it came in from the grocery store and putting it in the freezer and hoping that it doesn't get freezer burned at the end. So, um, there are a lot of good tips out there of how to freeze properly just to make sure you have the best quality product. But you do want to allow for headspace and sealing bags, making sure there's no like loose ends or anything. And as I said before, you want to freeze as soon as they're packed, as soon as they're sealed as well. Safe methods of thawing. So say you've frozen your food, how are you going to thaw it? Sometimes I'll see that people are thawing on the counter. Um, that makes me concerned because I'm thinking about bacteria that's growing because the food is in the temperature danger zone. So these are the 4 ways that we can safely thaw food. So under refrigeration, this is if you have a wonderful memory that you need to cook that food and you've put it in the refrigerator the night before or the day before. Another method is microwaving. Something that I use, especially in the holidays, is like cool running water. And then you're changing the water every 30 minutes. That's a good thawing practice. And then also, you can thaw food by cooking it. It's just going to take a lot longer to cook that food. But those are the safe methods of thawing versus just, putting it on the counter for hours and hours. So common questions that I get, like people a lot of times will say, "Hey, I made this. Is this safe to eat?" Um, Honestly, if people don't use a tested recipe, I have to like analyze their recipe and compare it to a tested recipe to know that it's safe. I think with cooking, you can explore a lot with flavors and just, adding personal touches to it. But like when it comes to like canning, you really can't. You can explore with maybe spices, but that's essentially it. You really got to follow a tested recipe. And then can I use these untested recipes, tools, or equipment? Um, it really depends on what you're asking. Honestly, once a month I'll find out something else that's on the market and I have to look it up and see if it's safe or not. But there's a lot of things on the market now that say they make claims that, they're safe to use, or an organization says they're safe to use, but they may not be. So it's always important to refer back to the USDA or refer back to, your extension folks. And then the other question I get, and I just talked about this, but I thawed my food on the counter. Is it safe? Well, the question that I have back is, how long was it thawed on the counter? Was it an hour? Was it 2 hours? Was it 3 hours? Was it 4 hours? Those, time matters. But yeah, if something was thawed on the counter for 4 hours or more, I would say that, it needs to be tossed. And that's like with this picture, for an example, with chicken. So that's all I have. I hope I did not frighten anyone from canning. I encourage you all to dabble with it. It's a great thing to do to prevent food waste and just try different things. But this is my contact information if you have any questions.
We have a question about how you blanch again.
Oh, how to blanch. So basically, here, I'll go
Yes.
back to that slide. Oh, and it doesn't say, does it? Okay, so basically you're gonna use 1 gallon of boiling water per 1 pound of prepared vegetables. It doesn't matter what kind of vegetable that you're using. It could be, for example, in the picture, broccoli. If you got 1 pound of broccoli, you're going to use 1 gallon of boiling water. You'll put those vegetables in some sort of like, I mean, it could be a colander or a blanching basket. You're going to lower it in that boiling water, and then you'll start that blanching time as long as that water is boiling. If for whatever reason you put the vegetables in the water and then it stopped boiling, you're just going to wait for it to do that rolling boil again, just like what you do when you're, cooking pasta or something. And then after that, you're gonna cool it in this like ice bath, and that's what this picture is actually. Is it's in this like ice water bath, and that cools the vegetables really quickly, and it stops the cooking process from happening.
Candace, hi, I'm Dolores. I wanted to know also, you said with regards to canning, 18 months is the limit that we can have those produce in the canning jars.
So that is what some manufacturers say. So if you look at like the ball jars, that's just one of them on the market. They recommend 18 months. In extension, you can probably keep things for about 2 years and then just check and see if there's any spoilage or not. But yeah, we would say 2 years. But for the best quality product, it would be 18 months.
I'm gonna have
Okay,
to
and I
go
have
through my
another
I'm gonna
question.
have to go through my
Oh, go
cupboard
ahead.
again then and see what's on the jars. Thank you.
Mhm.
And I know you were talking about the canning and boiling the like that there are some actual equipment. Is it like you said canning equipment and boiling equipment? Does it have to be a certain brand that's been approved or
No,
you just
so
go?
like, so what's nice about boiling water canning, what we talked about today, is like honestly, you could use a very large stock pot as long as it has a lid and you can buy a rack with it. So like I know at Walmart they've got these like silicone racks for canning. You can just buy that and put it in your large stock pot. The most important thing is that you've got like a lid, a large pot, and that rack. But like whereas like if you were to pressure can, there are certain brands that like Extension recommends, and it's a little more complicated. But boiling water, you could start with something lower budget, with what you have.
And Ball has a canning kit at Walmart and places like that.
Yeah, Walmart is a great place to stop at if this is not endorsed or anything. I mean, there's other places, but yeah, that's a great place to start if you're looking for canning supplies. And then they sell like at the dollar stores canning lids. If you do purchase those, I would just be wary that your seal might not work with those. I've heard quite a few things that about jars not sealing properly with the more budget lids. So just be careful about using something like that.
Any more questions or comments? If not, Candace, we want to just thank you again for giving us this information. Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Dolores, did you have a
Yes,
question
I
or comment?
did. With regards to tomatoes, I know you have to wash and make sure they're clean, get the best picked tomatoes, but do you need to cut them up or can you just put them in the jar? Do I need to pre-cook them? Is that what I'm trying to say? Do I need to pre-cook my tomatoes before putting them in jars?
Yes, so whatever the recipe says is what you're gonna do, but most of the recipes like from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, that's what I used. It's from University of Georgia. They want us to remove the skins. And that's just to make sure that like the heat, like the heat there basically so there's no cold spots in the jar. That's why they want you to remove the skins of the tomatoes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. But yeah, you feel free, like if anyone is canning, here, I'll write my email again, but like honestly, I feel like half of my job is answering food safety questions. So like feel free to shoot me an email if you've got questions. And don't feel like they're just one-off questions because I get these questions all the time.
And we thank you for that. Ladies, if you don't mind putting your information in the chat, because that's the way I use that as a roster. If you can put your name in there, if you did not, and if you have some more questions, please feel free.
I guess I do so. The freezing, I know you said we can use the Ziploc bags. Do it have to be like the suction Ziploc bags, or can we just use like a basic Ziploc bag and making sure all the air is out?
Yeah, you can just use a regular Ziploc bag, making sure the air's out. That's perfectly fine.
Some more questions? If not, we will end today's learning burst. But again, Candace has put her information in the chat, and we will also make sure that it goes out whenever we send all the learning bursts out this month and the certificates, okay? So we will definitely make sure that happens. But if all hearts and minds are clear, we will end our learning burst for today. And remember that next week's learning burst is going to be a food-based activity to do in your classrooms.